The hidden reality of mega prisons most people never hear about. The prison appeared out of nowhere on the horizon, rising from the flat desert scrubland of southern Arizona like a fortress built for a war no one declared. Razor wire caught the afternoon sun in long silver ribbons. Guard towers stood at each corner like stone sentinels that never blinked. The sign at the main gate read Blackridge Correctional Complex, maximum security. But the men who survived it called it something else entirely. They called it the mouth. Because once it opened and swallowed you whole, most men never came back out the same way they went in. Detective Lena Voss had driven 4 hours from Phoenix on a 2-lane highway that seemed to vanish into the earth before she even saw the compound. She was 41 years old, with sharp green eyes that had witnessed more crime scenes than she cared to count, and a reputation within the Arizona Department of Criminal Investigations for refusing to close a case before it was truly finished. She was not supposed to be here. She had been assigned a different case entirely, a missing persons report out of Scottsdale involving a wealthy real estate developer. But 3 days ago, a former inmate named David Carrow had called her personal cell phone from a payphone in Tucson, speaking in short, breathless sentences before the line went dead. "They're doing things in there that don't exist on paper," Carrow had said. "Men are disappearing. Not escaping. Disappearing. And someone on the outside knows exactly where the bodies are." Lena had run David Carrow's name through every database available to her. His record was clean for the last 2 years, but before that he had served 6 years at Blackridge for armed robbery, released on good behavior 14 months ago. No known associates with violent records. No outstanding warrants. No reason to fabricate a story this specific. And then 48 hours after the call, David Carrow's body was found floating face down in a canal on the eastern edge of Tucson. Cause of death, according to the preliminary report, was listed as drowning. Manner of death, undetermined. That word, undetermined, was the reason Lena Voss was now sitting in her car outside the main gate of Blackridge Correctional Complex, staring at a facility that housed over 4,000 inmates and employed nearly 900 staff across 3 rotating shifts. It was one of 12 mega-prisons operating in the American Southwest under contracts split between the state government and a private corrections corporation called Meridian Secure Solutions. Meridian managed the facilities, the staffing, the supply chains, the internal disciplinary systems, and almost everything else that happened behind those walls. The state, in theory, provided oversight. In practice, as Lena was beginning to understand, the state mostly looked the other way. She had done her homework on the drive out. Blackridge had been the subject of a federal oversight inquiry 18 months ago after a whistleblower complaint alleged systematic abuse in the solitary confinement units. The inquiry had been opened, reviewed, and quietly closed within 4 months. The whistleblower, a corrections officer named Thomas Greer, had resigned his position shortly after and had not given a public statement since. Lena had tried to locate Greer before making this drive. His last known address was an apartment complex in Flagstaff. The apartment had been vacated. No forwarding address. No new lease filed under his name anywhere in the state. 2 men had tried to tell the truth about this place. One was dead. One had vanished. The guard at the front gate checked her credentials twice before making a phone call that lasted nearly 5 minutes. He returned to her window with the expression of a man who had been told exactly how much to say and nothing more. He handed back her badge and gave her a numbered visitor pass attached to a lanyard. "Assistant Warden Cole will meet you in the administrative building," he said. "Please follow the escort vehicle and do not stop anywhere along the route." The administrative building was a squat, climate-controlled structure separated from the main housing blocks by 2 sets of reinforced gates. Assistant Warden Patricia Cole was waiting at the entrance, dressed in a pressed gray uniform with silver insignia on the collar, her dark hair pulled back severely. She was perhaps 50, with the practiced smile of someone who had learned to make warmth look like a policy rather than a feeling. "Detective Voss," Cole said, extending a hand. "We were surprised to get your request on such short notice. May I ask what specific incident brings you all the way out here from Phoenix?" "A former inmate named David Carrow died in Tucson 2 days ago," Lena said, watching Cole's face carefully. "He made contact with me before his death regarding conditions inside this facility." Cole's expression did not change. That itself told Lena something. A normal person hearing that a former inmate from their facility had just died would register at least a flicker of something: surprise, concern, even curiosity. Cole registered nothing. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "I'm not sure how we can help with a death that occurred outside our jurisdiction, but we're happy to cooperate however we can." Lena nodded. "I'd like to review your internal incident logs for the past 18 months, Any records related to inmate transfers, solitary confinement placements and medical unit admissions. Cole's smile held. Of course. I'll need to run that request through our legal compliance team at Meridian headquarters. Could take 3 to 5 business days. I can wait, Lena said. And she meant it in more ways than one. She was assigned a small conference room with a window that looked out over a concrete courtyard. 3 inmates in orange jumpsuits were visible below, moving slowly along a chain-link perimeter. One of them looked up at her window. He held her gaze for exactly 4 seconds before a guard stepped into her line of sight and the man looked away. That evening, while reviewing the documentation Cole had agreed to provide immediately, Lena found a single anomaly buried inside a routine maintenance log. A notation, dated 11 months ago, referenced, Emergency Decommission of Unit 7, Sublevel B. There was no follow-up report. No authorization signature. No explanation for what had been decommissioned or why. Sublevel B did not appear anywhere else in the facility schematics she had been provided. She pulled up the architectural records she had obtained from the county permit office before leaving Phoenix. She cross-referenced the building dimensions against the internal floor plans Cole's team had handed her. The numbers did not match. Blackridge Correctional Complex had at least one floor that did not exist in any official document. And somewhere beneath those desert flats, behind walls that had been built to keep secrets as much as prisoners, something had been happening that no oversight committee had ever seen, no journalist had ever reported, and no survivor had ever lived long enough to fully describe. Lena closed her laptop. She looked out the window at the last red glow of sundown fading behind the guard towers. She had a feeling she was not going to make it back to Phoenix in 3 to 5 business days. The night inside Blackridge did not feel like night anywhere else on Earth. There was no real darkness, only the sickly yellow wash of industrial floodlights that hummed continuously from every corner of the compound, casting shadows that seemed to move even when nothing did. Lena had been given a room in the staff quarters, a narrow box with a cot, a metal locker, and a single window reinforced with wire mesh. She lay on top of the cot fully dressed, her phone resting on her chest, staring at the ceiling and thinking about a floor that did not exist. She had gone back over the numbers 3 times before going to bed. The county permit records showed the original construction footprint of Blackridge at the time of its first phase of completion in 2009, when it was still a state-operated facility. The total square footage listed on the original permits was substantially larger than the internal floor plans that Meridian's compliance team had handed her that afternoon. The discrepancy was not small. It was not a rounding error or a drafting inconsistency. The missing space, when calculated conservatively, was large enough to hold an entire additional wing of the facility. And the only reference to anything below the ground floor was that single maintenance log notation. Emergency Decommission of Unit 7, Sublevel B. No signature. No date stamp on the authorization. Nothing. At 2:17 in the morning, her phone vibrated. The number was blocked. She answered on the second ring. Silence for a moment, then a male voice, low and careful, speaking with the measured cadence of someone choosing every word like it might be the last one they ever said. "You're the detective from Phoenix." "Who is this?" Lena said, sitting up. "Someone who still works here and wishes he didn't. You need to stop asking about the maintenance logs. Not because you're wrong. Because you're right, and that's what gets people hurt in this place. Tell me about Sublevel B," Lena said. Another pause. She could hear faint ambient sound in the background, the hum of what might have been an HVAC system, the distant clang of something metallic. He was calling from inside the facility. "Sublevel B was never decommissioned," the voice said. "That entry in the log was written to make it disappear on paper. It's still down there. They use it for inmates who aren't supposed to exist anymore, guys who filed grievances, guys who talked to lawyers, guys who became problems. They don't go to solitary. They go below. And below there are no records, no feeding schedules, no medical checks. Nothing." "How many?" Lena asked. "I don't know exactly. I've seen at least 11 names cycled through in the past 2 years that never showed up in any transfer log or release document. They just stopped existing inside the system. Can you get me physical access?" The silence that followed lasted long enough that Lena thought the call had dropped. Then the voice said, "There's a service corridor on the east side of the medical unit. There's a gray utility door marked Electrical Substation 3. It's not locked from the outside during the overnight maintenance window, which runs from 3:15 to 4:45. I can't be anywhere near you when you go. If anyone sees me with you, I'm finished." The line went dead. Lena sat in the dark room for 90 seconds, running the calculation. She was inside a private prison facility as an official visitor. She had no search warrant covering internal spaces. Anything she found by entering a restricted area without authorization would face serious evidentiary challenges in court. She also understood that the man who had called David Carrow information into her was dead, and that a corrections officer who had tried to go through official channels had evaporated from the state entirely. The legal path was a road that Meridian's lawyers had already paved, sealed, and put barriers across. The corridor behind the door marked Electrical Substation 3 might be the only path that actually led somewhere. She laced up her boots, clipped her badge to her belt, and moved. The medical unit was on the eastern side of the complex, connected to the main housing blocks by a covered walkway that ran along the interior perimeter wall. At 3:20 in the morning, the walkway was empty except for a single guard making rounds at the far end, moving away from her. Lena stayed close to the wall, moved with purpose, and kept her pace steady. Nothing draws attention in a facility like hesitation. She had learned that years ago working undercover in a different life. The gray utility door was exactly where the voice had described it, set slightly recessed into the concrete wall, with a small placard reading ES3 bolted above the handle. She pressed the handle down and the door opened without resistance, swinging inward on heavy hinges into a dim stairwell that descended sharply to the left. The smell that rose from below was immediate and specific. Damp concrete, something chemical, and underneath both of those, something organic and wrong that she had encountered before only in places where people had been kept for a very long time in very bad conditions. She took the stairs down slowly, one hand trailing the wall, using only the ambient light bleeding down from above. At the bottom of the stairwell, a corridor extended perhaps 60 feet in both directions. The ceiling was lower here than anywhere else in the facility. Exposed conduit ran along the walls. At intervals along both walls were doors, heavy steel doors, each fitted with a small sliding observation panel. No numbers. No nameplates. Just doors. Lena moved to the nearest one and slid the panel open. The cell inside was approximately 8 feet by 8 feet. There was a drain in the center of the floor, a metal platform bolted to the wall that served as a bed, and a man sitting on the floor in the far corner with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up to his chest. He was thin in the way that spoke of months rather than weeks. His beard had grown past his collarbone. When the light from the panel reached his eyes, he turned his face away from it involuntarily, like a man who had not seen anything brighter than a maintenance bulb in a very long time. Lena kept her voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name?" The man turned back toward her slowly. He looked at her badge. His lips moved twice before sound came out. "Reeves," he said. "Kyle Reeves. I was supposed to be transferred to a minimum security facility in New Mexico 14 months ago. They told me I was being transferred. They put me in a van. And then I ended up here." Lena pulled her phone and began photographing the door, the panel, the corridor. Her hands were steady. Her mind was running at a speed she recognized from only the most serious cases of her career. "How many others are down here?" she asked. Kyle Reeves looked down the corridor and back at her. "I stopped counting at 9, he said. "But I've heard more voices than that." She moved down the corridor, sliding open panels one by one. Each cell held a man. Most of them flinched from the light. Several did not react at all, sitting or lying in positions that worried her deeply. In the 7th cell she opened, she found something that stopped her cold. The man inside was sitting upright on the metal platform, fully alert, watching the panel as if he had been expecting it to open. He was perhaps 60 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent a career in authority before it was taken from him. "You're not staff," he said immediately. "No," Lena said. "Then you need to understand something before you take another step in this facility." He moved closer to the door, close enough that she could see the careful focus in his eyes. "My name is Raymond Holt. I was a federal compliance auditor assigned to review Meridian's Secure Solutions contract performance 18 months ago. I filed a preliminary report indicating systemic fraud, civil rights violations, and evidence of deliberate inmate disappearance from official records. 3 days after I filed that report, I was arrested on charges I had never heard of, processed through a facility I did not recognize, and placed in this cell. There has been no hearing, no counsel, no communication with the outside world." Lena felt the entire case reorganize itself in her mind like tectonic plates shifting. This was no longer a missing persons inquiry. This was not even a straightforward civil rights investigation. What was happening beneath Blackridge Correctional Complex was something far larger and far darker than one dead former inmate calling from a payphone in Tucson. A federal auditor had been disappeared into a private prison's illegal subfloor. And someone very high up in the chain between Meridian Secure Solutions and the government contracts that funded this facility had made sure no one ever came looking. Until now. She was photographing Raymond Holt's cell when she heard the door at the top of the stairwell open behind her. And the lights in the corridor came on all at once, full and blinding, flooding every shadow out of existence. A voice from the top of the stairs, calm and utterly without warmth, said, "Detective Voss. I think it's time we had a more honest conversation about why you're really here." It was Assistant Warden Patricia Cole. And she was not alone. The light was merciless. Lena stood in the middle of the corridor, phone in hand, photographs already taken, and felt the specific quality of danger that comes not from chaos but from control. Patricia Cole descended the stairs with the unhurried pace of someone who owned every inch of the ground beneath her feet. Behind her came two men in plain gray uniforms with no visible insignia, no name tags, nothing that identified them as belonging to any official body. That detail registered immediately. Official guards wore identification. These men did not want to be remembered. Cole reached the bottom of the stairwell and stopped, surveying the open observation panels along the corridor with an expression that was more administrative than angry. She looked at Lena the way an executive looks at a spreadsheet error, something to be corrected rather than confronted. "You entered a restricted area without authorization," Cole said. "That's a serious breach of your visitor agreement. You're housing a federal compliance auditor in an unlisted subfloor with no legal process, no counsel and no record of his detention," Lena said. "I'd say we've moved well past visitor agreements." Cole's expression did not shift. "Raymond Holt is a disturbed individual who made false allegations against a legitimate corrections contractor and subsequently suffered a mental health crisis requiring secure placement for his own protection." "For 18 months, Lena said. "These things take time." Lena looked at the two men behind Cole. They had positioned themselves at the base of the stairs, blocking the only exit. Her phone was in her hand with the photographs already captured, but she had not yet transmitted them anywhere. The facility's signal blocking was aggressive even in the main building. Down here she had nothing. "I want to know who else knows you're here," Cole said. And there it was. That was the real question. Not what Lena had found, not what she could prove, but whether anyone on the outside was expecting her to report back. Whether her disappearance would generate immediate noise or whether it could be managed quietly, the way David Carrow's death had been managed, the way Thomas Greer's silence had been managed, the way Raymond Holt's entire existence had been erased from every official record. Lena had anticipated this moment on the drive out from Phoenix. Not this specific corridor, not these specific men, but the shape of the moment. The point at which someone with something enormous to lose would need to know how exposed they actually were. "My supervising lieutenant in Phoenix has a sealed document," Lena said, keeping her voice level. "It contains everything I compiled before driving here. Architectural discrepancies, David Carrow call, Thomas Greer's disappearance, the maintenance log entry. He's been instructed to open it and forward it to the FBI field office and 2 separate investigative journalists if I don't check in by 6 this morning." Cole studied her for a long moment. The two men behind her did not move. "That may or may not be true," Cole said. "Try me," Lena said. The silence in the underground corridor lasted perhaps 20 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Then Cole tilted her head slightly and said something to one of the men in a voice too low for Lena to hear. The man produced a phone and stepped back up the stairs. Cole looked at Lena with that same flat administrative composure. "Why don't we go upstairs and speak in my office?" Cole said. "I'll go upstairs," Lena said. "Raymond Holt and everyone else in this corridor comes with me." Cole's jaw tightened for the first time. A small crack in the architecture of her control. "That is not something I have the authority to." "Then call whoever does," Lena said. "Right now. Because the clock I just described to you started the moment I walked through that utility door, and the only thing that stops it is me making a phone call from somewhere with a working signal before 6 a.m. It was 4:12 in the morning. Cole made the call. What happened in the following 90 minutes would later be described in federal court documents as one of the most significant exposures of private corrections misconduct in American legal history. But inside the moment it felt nothing like history. It felt like a woman standing in a fluorescent corridor trying not to show the men across from her that her hands were shaking. The call Cole made went to someone whose name Lena would not learn until the subsequent federal investigation, a senior vice president at Meridian Secure Solutions named Gerald Fitch, who had overseen the Blackridge contract since its private transition in 2014 and who had, according to later testimony, personally authorized the use of Sublevel B as an off-record detention space for what Internal Meridian Communications referred to as liability management cases. Raymond Holt had been a liability management case. So had 3 other men in that corridor, 2 former inmates who had filed civil rights lawsuits against Meridian and 1 paralegal from a prisoners' rights organization in Albuquerque who had been arrested on fabricated drug charges and funneled into Blackridge through a corrupted intake process that bypassed standard state review entirely. The other men in that corridor were simply men who had become inconvenient. Inmates who had organized hunger strikes, inmates who had filed too many grievances, inmates who had been identified as potential witnesses in pending litigation against the facility. They had been moved from official housing, their records quietly altered to show routine transfers to other facilities, and placed below the floor of a building that officially had no floor below. Gerald Fitch, upon receiving Cole's call at 4:14 in the morning, made the calculation that a cover-up was no longer viable. He had been making similar calculations for 2 years, each time concluding that the walls were still holding. This time, the walls had a detective standing inside them with a phone full of photographs and a sealed file waiting to detonate in a Phoenix police lieutenant's desk drawer. Fitch called the company's general counsel. The general counsel called a crisis management firm. Somewhere in that chain, someone made the decision that the safest path forward was controlled disclosure rather than obstruction, because obstruction of a law enforcement officer inside a federal contractor facility with a documented audit trail would transform a civil liability situation into a criminal one that no amount of legal management could contain. By 5:45 a.m., Lena was standing in the main administrative building with a working phone signal, a direct line open to the FBI field office in Phoenix, and Patricia Cole sitting across a conference table from her in the specific silence of someone who has decided to start talking. Cole talked for 3 hours. Raymond Holt was transported to a hospital in Tucson that morning, along with 8 other men recovered from Sublevel B. 2 of them required immediate medical attention. All of them had been held without any legal process for periods ranging from 4 months to, in Holt's case, 18 months. The documentation Holt had managed to preserve, written in the margins of a deteriorating paperback novel that had been his only reading material, included names, dates, Meridian internal reference numbers, and a partial list of officials he believed had been aware of the program. That handwritten record, photographed by Lena and later entered into federal evidence, became the spine of a prosecution that would take 14 months to build and result in criminal charges against 9 individuals, including Gerald Fitch and 3 state corrections officials who had accepted payments from Meridian in exchange for suppressing oversight inquiries. Patricia Cole cooperated fully. In exchange for her testimony, she received a reduced sentence. She had known about Sublevel B for 11 months before Lena arrived. She had told herself, according to her statement, that it was above her pay grade. The court found that to be an insufficient defense. Thomas Greer, the corrections officer who had first filed the whistleblower complaint 18 months prior, was located by federal investigators in a small town in rural Montana, living under a different name. He had fled after receiving explicit threats against himself and his family. He returned to testify. His account of what he had witnessed during his time at Blackridge, delivered in a federal courtroom in Phoenix on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, caused 3 jurors to visibly weep. David Carrow's death was reclassified. The canal where his body was found was re-examined, and forensic evidence ultimately linked his drowning to a private investigator employed by Meridian whose phone records placed him in Tucson on the night Carrow died. That investigator, a former law enforcement officer named Alan Burris, was charged with second-degree murder. He maintained his innocence through 2 trials. The second jury did not agree. Meridian Secure Solutions had its federal contracts suspended pending review within 6 months of the Blackridge exposure. The review, conducted by an independent oversight body with actual enforcement authority, found similar but less severe irregularities at 2 other Meridian-operated facilities in Texas and Georgia. Those investigations were ongoing as of the filing date of the last court document in the Blackridge case. Lena Voss returned to Phoenix on a morning in early December, driving the same 2-lane highway she had taken out, watching the desert flatten in every direction under a sky that was completely, quietly blue. She had not slept properly in 6 weeks. She had given testimony 4 times, been deposed twice, fielded calls from journalists on 4 continents, and received a formal commendation from the Arizona Department of Criminal Investigations that she had not yet opened. She thought about David Carrow on that drive. A man who had served his time, rebuilt something resembling a life, and then picked up a payphone and called a detective he had no reason to trust because he could not make himself stay quiet about what he had seen. He had known what it might cost him. She believed that completely. He had made the call anyway. She thought about Kyle Reeves, who had told her his name through a steel door in a corridor that did not officially exist, his voice barely functioning after 14 months of isolation but still precise, still human, still holding on to the fact of his own name as if it were the last thing in the world that belonged entirely to him. She thought about the 8 other men who had come up those stairs into the Arizona dawn, blinking against a sky they had not seen in months, some of them unable to walk without assistance, all of them alive in the specific, fragile way of people who had nearly stopped being. She did not think about what would have happened if she had stayed in Phoenix and let the case go cold. She had learned a long time ago that some thoughts are only useful when they lead somewhere, and that one led nowhere she was willing to go. The highway stretched ahead. The sky held its color. She drove. Blackridge Correctional Complex was officially closed by court order 7 months after that night. The gates were chained. The floodlights were cut. The razor wire caught the desert sun one last time and then stopped catching anything at all. But Sublevel B remained exactly as Lena had found it, preserved as a federal crime scene, every cell documented, every drain, every metal platform, every name scratched into concrete by men who needed someone to know they had been there. The walls were finally silent. The names were not. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know that the truth inside systems like this one is almost always darker than the version we're allowed to see. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, the next story is already waiting. And trust us when we tell you you are not ready for it.